This is a Hot Pie Original.
But if there's one thing that neuroscience has really taught us is critical. Probably goes beyond everything else we talked about. It's nutrition. It's nutrition and exercise. So physical exercise is not only critical for maintaining the health of your body, but also the health of your brain. And whether that's, aerobic exercise or high intensity interval training or even endurance, but it seems very clear that all of those have a positive impact on the brain. And, in the case of, for example, neuropsychiatric disorders, that's as good as or better than the best pharmaceutical treatment. But wouldn't you just rather, exercise, feel good about yourself, and your mental health is going to improve? So I do that every day.
Dr. Michael Platt is the director of the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative at the University of Pennsylvania. With over 2 decades of experience as a professor and practitioner in neuroscience, psychology, and marketing, Platt investigates the biological mechanisms that underlie decision-making, team building, leadership, and marketing. In this episode, we discussed his new book, The Leader's Brain, which investigates the brain science behind enhancing leadership, building stronger teams, decision-making, and innovation. We also talked about developing team cohesion in a virtual work environment, the social brain network, ADD and creativity, and so much more. This was an absolutely fascinating episode. If you're looking for information and resources to improve your health, well-being, and performance, then sign up for my free high-performance newsletter, Adaptation. Just go to www.ericquorum.com and sign up now. This newsletter is my effort to bring zero-cost, high-performance resources and tools to anyone with a desire to improve. But now, it's time to lean in and learn from the best. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you on the show. This is going to be fantastic. Want to get started, you have such an interesting background. I mean, you've had a fantastic career in the world of neuroscience. And it seems like your dive into neuroscience got started, though, with an interest in monkeys. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I came to neuroscience late. So in fact, I don't even have any paper credentials in neuroscience. So my degrees are in anthropology. And the reason that I pursued anthropology is I was super interested in monkeys, and the similarities between monkeys and humans had always fascinated me ever since I was a kid. So that kind of led me down the path of studying monkeys and then trying to figure out what was going on in their heads and how that could tell us something about what's going on in our heads.
What made you decide to start studying the neuroscience of leadership? Like, how did you make the jump from animals to humans?
Well, it wasn't really a jump. It was sort of a slow glide,
Okay.
So, it's funny because, at the beginning of my career, I was just trying to understand human nature, just kind of what makes us tick and, what makes some people tick differently than others. Some people tick well together and some not. And, that led down the course of studying monkey behavior and then studying the monkey brain to try to connect brain to behavior. And then increasingly trying to connect that back to a lot of the big questions I started out with, which is like, what makes a person a good leader? What makes a person make good decisions? How can we help people to be more creative and innovative? And so it's kind of like, I was studying all that from a very mechanistic perspective. And then when I moved back to the University of Pennsylvania, and in particular to the Wharton School of Business, that really crystallized for me the opportunity to take all of that new knowledge and try to apply it to, I think, what's most relevant for the people we were really educating at Wharton, which are the next generation of business leaders.
I love just the applied nature of what you're doing because I know for a lot of people out there, when they hear the word neuroscience, they get a little scared. They think of, oh my gosh, all the, the chemistry and the biology of the brain, like this is just way beyond me. But in your book, The Leader's Brain, which I absolutely love, it is not scary at all. It's as a matter of fact, you make it so accessible that I think people are going to maybe have a different little bit of a view on how they can improve their leadership. But in your opinion, and based off of your research, do you believe that leaders are born or made?
Well, like almost everything in life, it's about 50-50. So, it's kind of like there's a pretty strong, biological endowment in terms of what we get from our parents, whether we consider, how kind of at ease we are connecting with other people or how creative we are. But that's about maybe half of what you got. And then, then the other half is what you do with it. So, for just about every faculty that's important for leadership, there are things that you can do. You can literally kind of go to the brain gym and exercise those different traits and capabilities, and you can improve. So that's one feature of the human brain that really stands out in terms of neuroscience of the last 100 years is how flexible, in fact, the human brain is.
So, what are some key qualities of an effective leader, and maybe how could somebody that wants to go to the brain gym develop those things?
Yeah. So I think from my perspective, one of the most important, if not the most important, is the ability to relate to people, to have high, what we call EQ or emotional intelligence. So the ability to be a good coach and a good communicator to help your people, the people that you're leading, to reach their peak potential, and to understand how to put people together onto teams as well that are high functioning. So in the book, I kind of call that leading with the social brain. So we now know after, really a series of amazing discoveries in the last 15 years or so, that we have a network in our brains we often call the social brain network that is dedicated to managing our connections with other people. And we know that kind of the stronger that network is, like the bigger it is and the better wired up it is, the better you do at relating to other people, the more friends and allies you actually have. And that's associated with success in all domains of life. So then the key question is, well, what can you do to kind of turn that dial up to 11? And, there are some really kind of basic things you can do. So the first and foremost is exercising. So get out, use your social brain by interacting with other people and, meet new people, talk to people. When you go to the bodega on the corner, actually interact with the people in the store. When you go to the farmer's market, you go to the company picnic, whatever. All those things are working on your social brain. And that's kind of what I call that is like, that's sort of the walking on a treadmill part of exercising your social brain. Like it's really good. It keeps it functioning. It's going to tune it up. But if you want to give it like high intensity interval training, which is, really, really, rocking it, then there are specific exercises that you can do. That's something we've been working on here in the lab and in some applications where you go through a methodical, intentional process. For example, like 5 minutes a day of trying to take the perspective of another person quite vividly and to describe a situation through their eyes. And that's kind of the HIT training for the social brain network. And, it ends up changing your brain. And it changes in a very systematic way that we think allows you to kind of be able to read people's minds a little bit better, be able to read people better. And if you can do that, I think you're going to be a better leader.
Very interesting. And now in this world of connectivity and technology, when we say communicate, like we're talking about in-person communication, like how is social media or these online platforms impacted our ability to, I guess you could say, flex this social brain network? Do people really need to get in a room with somebody or get in a Zoom meeting with somebody? I'm just interested because there's so much of our relationship building now, right or wrong, is done online.
Yeah, I think this is top of mind for almost everyone because this has been our interaction for the last year plus. I think that everybody has the sense that, or at least most people have the sense that it's different somehow, even though we've gotten better at it. And I feel like I've gotten better at it. It's not so uncomfortable as it was before. But we also suffer from things like Zoom fatigue. It's just much more difficult, I think, for our brains to kind of, especially if there are a lot of people on the call, to be able to spontaneously dial in and pick up the nonverbal cues that people are continuously emitting, and which help to guide the conversation, right? And so that's a lot harder, I think, and our brains have to work quite a bit harder, and that's why we get tired. That's why it is a difficult medium in which to interact. That said, it seems that people do derive some degree of pleasure, some degree of emotional exhilaration, also pain from interacting on social media, liking, disliking, getting nasty comments, leaving nasty comments. And it's interesting to think about that from an evolutionary perspective, because our ancestors weren't doing that. There was no virtual, it was all in person. And,
right.
and somehow we've been able to extend ourselves through digitally, right? Through the magic of the internet, and connect with people in ways that exploit our social brains and exploit the reward systems in our brains, but also do so in a really weird way. And you see that. I think that people, it goes awry. Like you get FOMO, or you get people. There's certainly rising anxiety and depression and mental health problems associated with all of that kind of interaction. I think especially for young people.
That's where my brain was going, was kids that are missing out. They're engaging so much on social media or through these chat rooms or whatever, that I'm interested to know, do you think it's blunting their ability to connect with folks in a real world?
So this topic comes up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there's good data on that,
mm-hmm.
right? The feedback I get from business leaders is that the sort of the youngest generations, as they're getting onboarded, need a lot of work as they're sort of brought into the office.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's this suspicion that because they were growing up in an environment where they were engaging so much online or through texts, where there's even less information there, less of the information that our brains are primed and ready to grab onto, that they might not have exercised it in exactly the way that it was sort of intended to be used.
Mm-hmm.
There is such a thing in neuroscience. There's a powerful concept of critical periods.
Okay.
Which are periods in development when our brains are primed to learn and develop certain skills. And they happen at different times, depending on maturity of different systems in the brain and what your experience is. And it's quite possible that interacting on social media is somehow interfering with the normal development through that critical period.
I'm interested. I just want to pivot just for a second, still on this idea of the social brain network. There's a lot of different types of leaders and organizations. You have technical founders, you got these guys or gals that are just like behind a computer writing code, right? And then they build some amazing technology, and next thing you know, they're thrust into a position of leadership.
Right.
And that's happening at a rapid pace because of the proliferation, democratization of technology, and how fast things are growing. What would be your advice to these types of individuals that are entrepreneurs that are out there hacking it away, and before you know it, they've got to scale and grow a team? Just what you're talking about, go flex these muscles, go out there and create deliberate conversations. I mean, do you see something lacking there? I mean, because some of these folks they're building things in their garage, and then the next thing you know, it impacts the world.
I mean, well, that's what happened at Google. There was a study called the Oxygen Project.
Yes.
Done over about a decade ago. And, what they found is that the people who worked for Googlers wanted leaders, they wanted managers who were good coaches, who had a high EQ, who would, help them, who were good communicators. And that's not in general, who those managers were. They were the good coders and engineers. And so Google had implemented a sort of on-the-job training exercise, basically a gym for these folks to really work out those muscles in their brains. I think that's one thing you can do. I mean, the other would be you could hire somebody,
right?
Your go-between who's going to be that really effective, team player, and who's going to be able to connect with the people on the team and to help them work together.
Interesting. Because Google, when you think about Google now, and then all the different books talk about the Google culture, I mean, they seem that they're doing it really, really well. They have a lot of strategic alignment using things like OKRs or whatever, but they get everybody kind of speaking the same language, and then they hold people accountable. Are there any other examples of companies out there that are just in your mind, like just really got it?
That's a really interesting question. I think there are many successful companies, right? And the companies that I've done work with, either through teaching or coaching or some research with them, they're kind of iconic brands, a lot of them, and I think that they have been successful and continue to evolve successfully because they have brought in more and more of a culture of connection, a culture of responsibility, and I think what's really important is shared values and purpose. So I think, for example, I'm teaching for Estee Lauder next week, and that's very top of mind. It's very foremost in the orientation of that company. I taught for Starbucks a few weeks ago. Very similar mindset there, and so I see that being, at Nike, I see that being pretty pervasive at a lot of the best companies that are out there. And I think you'll see more and more companies adopt that. I think a big question though, like, is it's one thing for a huge, Fortune 500 multinational company to have the resources to do that, and another for a small startup,
right? Where
times, you've got just a few people and they have to do everything, and it's pretty high stress. It might be a very different kind of environment to try to build that in a very intentional way.
I mentioned this to you previously, but I have a startup, and I've built a team of people that I've never met except for one person who had a previous relationship. But that's kind of the trend now, because people are realizing I don't have to move. Yeah. I could, I have engineers in Mexico and California or whatever. Could we talk for a minute about how to build rapport? Like, it used to be like you and I could walk into a room where we'd meet, shake hands. We'd kind of have this, as my friend says, the first bite is with the eye. And you talk about in your book how first impressions are really important. So maybe we talk about first impressions and then virtual first impressions.
Yeah. So I think one of the most important things in interaction is paying attention to the person that you are meeting and that you're interacting with, and looking them in the eye. And this is important for several reasons. I mean, one is that, first of all, we're very visual creatures. Primates in general use vision more than any other sensory modality. And because of that, we actually communicate a lot of information visually that we're unaware of. Micro expressions on our faces, changes in blood flow to the face, flushing, pupil sizes, opening, closing, all kinds of things are going on. So, and our brains are picking up on that dynamically, and that helps to guide the conversation and the interaction. So that's one reason why you need to really pay attention. And the second is that when we actually make eye contact with somebody, that tells the other person's brain that you're attending to them and you think they're important. And that also is, I think, important for guiding that conversation. And, one final thing is that eye contact itself is really important for building trust and kind of turning up the social brain. And one way we think it does is by causing the release of a chemical called oxytocin in our brains that kind of gets us really in sync. And so all those things happen quite naturally when we just kind of obey that number one rule, which is, look the person in the eye and actually pay attention to it.
Now let's talk about, like, in this virtual world, I'm sure we've all been on meetings where somebody's got this random camera over here, or what are some best practices, like, for how to adjust your camera or create an environment that's conducive for quick relationship building and gaining trust?
Yeah, this is a big challenge. For most people, there is an offset between where their camera is, which is typically at the top, of their screen. But some people, even, especially like a lot of these techies, will have an extra camera off to the side. So there, it's like I'm talking to you this way. That's about as awkward as it gets. You get to see
nice ear.
Yeah, exactly. So it makes it a real challenge. And, what it means is that even in the best of circumstances, if I'm looking you in the eye, I'm staring at the middle of the screen and not at the camera. And so what I suggest to people is to practice actually looking up at that green light, at the top of your screen, at least occasionally, and in particular when you want to convey something that's very important, when you want somebody to know that they're valued and that because you're paying attention to them. So that I think is critical. It's super awkward. So I'm looking up at, you feel like I'm looking you in the eye, but I'm looking at this little green light. It's even harder when you've got multiple people on the screen. So you might be talking to somebody down in the lower left corner in the gallery room, but in order to look them in the eye, you have to actually look completely away from them. It feels subjectively from your own perspective, it feels totally wrong. But from on their side, it feels like they're getting all of your attention, right? So yeah, I think it's something you can practice. I think it's something that you can get pretty good at, but it takes repetition. And it's something that, because it doesn't feel right at all.
So you've been dealing with big multinational companies, and there's a lot of decisions being made right now about, it's this pandemic now that we have vaccinations available. People are getting to have the opportunity. Do you want to come back to work? What are your feelings? Where do you think people are going to end up? Do you think that people are going to end up going back to work?
It's really interesting right now. It's such an interesting dynamic. Most employers, I think, want people back because they understand that you need to have people in the same place at least a good chunk of the time to boost innovation, to build a consistent culture where everybody has shared values and feel like they're part of the team. On the other hand, a lot of workers, the majority of workers, want to stay at home at least some of the time because they value their autonomy, they go more independence with their time, they don't commute, things like that. So that's understandable too. But there's a tension, right, between management and labor, if you will. And so there's going to have to be a solution. I don't think it's going to be a one size fits all solution. Some companies will have everybody back. Some companies, like Twitter has said, well, you can work wherever you want remotely, to their employees. And some will be, I think, where most will be in the middle, which is giving some flexibility to some people some of the time, but making sure that you have people in place, right, where they can interact, where they can bump into each other, where they can have those impromptu conversations. And, when called upon, they can actually have, spitballing sessions that, I have yet to hear of a really great, kind of creative meeting that's happened online. I think it's really difficult to do.
I call those constructive collisions.
Yeah. Right.
What do you think about these, environments like office arrangements? So there was a trend, in the early 2010s. My goodness, I'm dating myself. Where, it was kind of everything's going to be open, out in the open. Or if you went to the Bloomberg building, it was just like, there are no offices. What do you think about that? Like, to create a better corporate culture?
It's a great question. I prefer that kind of setup, and that's how my lab is designed, and basically all the labs that are here in this building. And I think in normal times that was really great. I mean, it's people, as much as people are, you get a lot from an energy from being around other people, and you learn from each other. It can be distracting too. So I think you have to have some way of, when you need it, being just being able to seal yourself off. So I think headphones are a good way to do that. That's what we do. But I think it's going to be really interesting. And I think that there are some people are going to remain very anxious about their health for a long time. And other people, it's going to be the exact opposite. And if, I can kind of based on what I saw, this past weekend in Philadelphia, where it was kind of like half rager, half people running away from the rager. was pretty remarkable. I think that's what we're going to see kind of in the office too. Some people will embrace it, and some people will, they'll still be wearing masks years from now.
I moved from Virginia to Texas during the pandemic. Texas is my home, and I hadn't lived back in the state. Well, anyway, so I'm in Virginia talking to a friend of mine, and I said, "Hey, I wonder what, we're kind of daydreaming. I wonder what it's going to be like when the pandemic's over." He goes, "Oh, just wait till you go back to Texas." And I got back. I'm not saying right or wrong, that it was just a different feeling. And I was a little, shy for a little bit. And then I, got comfortable again, but I can see that. And I think we need to be conscientious of other people's feelings and thoughts, because this has been a very traumatic, it's going to be 18 to 24 months for people. But yeah, that's very, it's just something that's top of mind with me right now, because as I think about my team, I'm thinking, we're so young. We need to be in that room together to have these, great discussions. I can go knock on somebody's door and be like, "Hey, Julia, what do you think about this?" It's hard to "Hey, can we get on a Zoom call?" Slack, Slack's great, but there's nothing that for me that replaces human to human interaction.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I see it, I feel it here with my own team. Some people want to be back. For people, it's going to take a lot more time to get comfortable. What is clear is that the collaborations that we used to have aren't happening. It's because people are, they're in the ultimate silo. They're at home.
So this creates opportunity, and it's also a risk for some other people. It's something that needs to be an alert, and other people like, hey, this is a time to accelerate and to move forward.
Yeah, again, it's not going to be a one size fits all, but right. There is, I think, a concern there about kind of equity, right? Because, some people will be less comfortable. Some people will embrace it. We know that certain neurodiverse populations, people who have social anxiety, for example, have been really happy to be at home, because that removes that kind of constant stress that they would have when they're in the workplace. And so I think that again brings up issues of how to accommodate. And I think it's going to be really tricky because, I talk about this all the time with a lot of people. How do you create an office environment where some people are there and some people are virtual, right? The only thing I think of is those little, those sort of video conferencing robots that move around and has a screen on the top.
I was just thinking this, you're going to be at a board table, and there's going to be a camera or a screen for so-and-so, and everybody else is going to be there, and you're just going to have to be okay with it. Or they'll be up on the board. This is really interesting. You have some interesting ideas and thoughts in here on, and this is a big pivot here, but on ADD and creativity. And I just thought this was fascinating. Could you talk about that for a few minutes?
Sure. So actually, one of the big, I think, the points of this book is when we stop thinking about differences in brains as better or worse, or you've got a disorder and I've got a normal brain. This variation is there for a reason, right? And there's probably good evolutionary reasons why we see such, differences like we call attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Why does it occur at such a high frequency in the population? That goes well beyond what you would expect just from kind of random mutations. It's probably selected evolutionarily for some good reason. And what we think, and what I think the biology suggests, is that people who have that phenotype, that way of thinking, right, that the sort of exploration circuits in their brain are turned way up, whereas this kind of focused execution parts of their brain are turned down. And, there could be environments, there could be situations where that makes perfect evolutionary sense, right? And in fact, that's been observed, for example, in a tribe in Africa where that are nomadic herders, and they have a mutation in a gene that here in the West is implicated in ADHD. And it occurs at like 5 times the frequency in this tribe. And it's interesting because they make their living by exploring, by constantly being on the move and looking for new resources. And what's interesting is that when folks who have that mutation move to villages and towns to take up a sedentary lifestyle, they don't do so well. And that's kind of like kids here in this country, kids with ADHD, and you put them in school where they're supposed to sit still in one place, all day long. That is fighting against their natural inclinations and talents, I would argue. So it's just really interesting that this sort of like get up and go circuit, go look for something new, which is primed in those folks, seems to be the same circuit that's involved in creativity, that is coming up with new ideas, thinking outside the box, divergent thinking, kind of all go together. And, once you begin to think about differences in that way, it opens up whole new possibilities, right? So, there's a talent shortage, believe it or not, out there, and it's going to get worse. That's what we hear from all of the sort of recruiters out there. And it's really hard for companies to find the people who have the talents for the jobs that they need to have done. And so there's a real opportunity here to make a match. If we can understand that, people with ADHD kind of have a superpower, which is potentially being really creative, out of the box thinkers.
Right.
We could understand how to identify and measure that characteristic, that capability more precisely, rather than asking a doctor to weigh in on it, or a parent or a teacher. Then there's a way to kind of make it a win-win,
right,
for companies and for people, for workers, right? The company gets a person who's better at the job. Person gets a job that's a better fit for them. They're happier. Everybody's happier, and makes more money, right?
Right.
So that's like how it should work out.
People are fulfilled, and they're not like put in a square peg. It's this like, you're very unconventional. Now you're going to be stuck in this conventional environment all the time. That would drive you nuts, completely nuts. And then, they're agitated. Well, of course they're agitated, because that goes against who they are as a person. In your book, you talk about how to create the environment or the conditions for creativity. Could you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so thinking about creativity. So first of all, we've just discussed the fact that, some people are a little bit more creative, some people are a little bit more focused, getting getting tasks done. But we understand that reflects the balance of two separate but interacting circuits in the brain. One that is this sort of innovation exploration network, and the other, which is kind of focus and get the job done. And in any of us, when one of those is up, the other one is down.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So in order to think outside the box and be creative, you kind of need to turn up that innovation network. But the only way to do that is disengage from routine tasks. So like being chained to your computer and, typing in Excel spreadsheets or answering, boring email, that's the worst thing you could do for creativity, because you have to disengage from that to allow your innovation network to become active. And we also know now, again, a lot of these dots are circumstantial that we're connecting, but that literally getting up and moving around, going for a walk, but even just moving seems to promote activity within that brain network. And we know that if you get up and you walk around, go for a walk, you'll come back, you will actually be a little bit more creative, a little bit more innovative than if you had been sitting there drudging away.
So do you create time or space in your day or week for just creative time? Like this is blocked out where I'm not going to do anything but just let my mind drift? Or
yeah, I can answer that in a couple of ways. Okay. I used to do more of that in the kind of creative thing, like, I would put aside time to play guitar or something like that. But the things that I do that are, a commitment every day.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, while I'm at work, I probably only work for 20 minutes at a time. And then I get up and I walk around. I'm just up and about. I have trouble sitting still for long periods of time. So I'm kind of on that like more ADHD side of the spectrum. And then, and then I exercise every day. And that's a time when, on the one hand, you're sort of focused, but not really. It's like you're out there.
Yeah.
Usually walking back and forth to my office. So it's about 1.5 miles each direction.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm walking, and I know this, it's like I'm walking and suddenly ideas are just coming. I just have to grab my phone and dictate into it, what's coming up. And I've had, honestly, like most of my best ideas. And then when I need an idea, I'll go for a long run or something like that. Go for a bike ride. Yeah.
Very interesting, because my workouts are is when everything comes to fruition. I'll be training and then I just like, oh my goodness. And I open my phone. I'm not that person that's on Instagram or whatever. I'm just writing down all of my thoughts and ideas. And it's just flooding out. That I just found that so fascinating, because I think other people this will make sense to them now. And, my picture in my mind is you think of that mad scientist or that brilliant mathematician, and they're pacing back and forth in front of a chalkboard, working through something, mulling it over in their mind.
That's why I will make one more remark, because when you're talking about working out, and it's like the difference between me and my wife when we work out. And she's a wonderful person, awesome scientist in her own right. But like when I work out, the only thing that's happening is there's music in the background.
What kind of music?
It really depends. But I'm a hardcore fan of WXPN, which University of Pennsylvania's rock station, basically. So it's a real mix of them. But I often will go really hardcore, like 70s hard rock or kind of maybe like Southern alt rock country now, like Drive-By Truckers or something like that. But she's the opposite. So she will have, an iPad on the bike or whatever and is watching the show or a movie. And it's like, it just doesn't compute for me, because for me, this is my time to completely lose myself, disconnect, not get engaged in something, but get completely disengaged from everything.
Right. So interesting how different we all are, and but these different coping or mechanisms create relief and enjoyment for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So something else that you do is you're involved. I mean, you're involved in a lot of things at Penn. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But you're involved in marketing.
Yes.
And this is super interesting to me, because the way that we, people think of the word sell and it's a bad word. No, people like to be sold. And if there's not an exchange of money for goods, then the whole economy collapses. So I love the idea of marketing. I love, can we talk a little bit about like just some of the science behind what's going on in our brains during this process? And then as you see technology changing and the platforms that we're selling and trying to deliver our value proposition to our customers to, like what's happening and what are some things maybe some people can take away from this conversation?
I mean, I'm a proud member of the marketing department at Wharton. So that's it's really a great place with awesome people, and I learned a lot. Having been a part of that department for a few years now. Marketing is super interesting, right? And branding and the ways in which we create an identity for a product, and the company behind it, and then how you get people, how you acquire customers and then keep them, right? So that's sort of the whole process. And, what's interesting is that a lot of that process has to do with how we relate to one another. And it's about taking that equation and translating it or shifting it to the brand.
Okay.
So and there's actually this kind of longstanding idea that kind of known as the relational hypothesis in marketing, which is that we relate to brands and the products that we love like they were another person, like they're a member of your family. And that we use words, human words, like personality words to describe brands. That's weird because they're, you say that's a rugged brand or that's a smart brand. I mean, it's not a person, right? It's a concept, right? So, and it's a company that's trying to make money. But nevertheless, we do those things. And, we got really interested in this idea. And so we we used neuroscience tools to look under the hood to basically see what was going on in people's brains while they were responding to news about brands. And it was really fascinating because we looked at basically Apple iPhone users and Samsung Galaxy users, and they were reading good and bad news about both brands. And what we found is that the brains of Apple users looked like they were hearing news about somebody in their family, like somebody they love. So they'd see joy and pain, in response to good and bad news. And it was so close to them that it was an extension of themselves in terms of the brain response. And that's not what we saw in the Samsung Galaxy customers. It's kind of like not really much of a social, emotional bond with Samsung. The only thing we saw was a sort of reverse empathy, like this hatred of Apple in the brains of Samsung users. So, which I think when you step back makes a lot of sense, right? So they do seem to be very different kinds of customers with a very different kind of relationship to the brand. In Samsung customers, maybe it's a little more functional and transactional. That can give you some insights if you were a third brand coming into the market. You wouldn't try to. You're never going to get the iPhone brand. Users. Those customers are going to stick with Apple forever, most likely, because they've got such a tight bond. But maybe easier to pluck those Samsung Galaxy customers, for example. But marketing, I think overall is probably the area. It is the area where historically neuroscience has sort of had the earliest foothold in terms of business, because I think it's pretty straightforward to think of ways in which you can add a complementary source of data to what people say, right, in terms of what they're thinking and feeling, and then actually measuring that directly, and use that, for example, in A/B testing ads. So you could identify ads or principles of ads, different creatives that are a bit more engaging, that create a stronger impression. That's been a very effective strategy. That's one reason why we now know that ads can be compressed ads actually can be more powerful, because the human attention span is not very long.
So you're saying just very short in duration?
Very short, right?
Yeah.
So now we see these 6-second ads. It turned out, and there were a number of studies showing that like first impressions matter a lot, and then kind of as the ad goes on, people's brains aren't as engaged, and so you could actually you could use that approach as a tool to moment to moment kind of compress the ad so that you just have the maximally most interesting and engaging parts of it, and not waste your time. Like, think of it, if you're gonna spend money on a Super Bowl ad,
right?
How much does that cost? If the shorter is better,
Yes,
that's a win, right?
So you're talking about these like emotional feelings people have about a brand. I think it was Marty Neumeier. He wrote the book, The Brand Flip, and then something else. But he said that it's like a gut reaction that you have, like to it's not people think it's a logo, or it's not. It's like this, like when I see the Jumpman for the Jordan brand, I feel invincible. Because as a kid, growing up in the 90s, Michael Jordan, he was invincible. And so even today I see that and I get this just exhilarating feel. How can we foster those feelings?
Well, I think there's two parts to this. The first part is if you can apply some neuroscience tools, this can give you some deeper insight into what people are thinking and feeling in a way that sometimes people have difficulty knowing or being able to express, right? So there's often a disconnect between what people say and what's going on in their heads, which is what adds to a lot of the noise, in marketing research, I think. And so that's helpful, but you still have to have creative, right? So you had to have somebody create that Jumpman. So I think that those two things have to work together. In the best kind of, from my perspective, the best approach would be to combine those. So you have neuroscience in house. and you use it in an iterated fashion to with creative to produce ever more engaging and arresting and emotionally triggering images and creative. That's how we do it. And the thing about neuroscience tools and I think that in the last decade has been just mind blowing, is that it's been shown multiple times that you can take a small focus group, like 24 people,
mm-hmm.
and if you measure their brain activity, you can predict sales across the entire market, like millions of people.
Really?
So that that's where you're like, wow, that's huge. That is a major lift that you're getting. You're able to put your focus group on some serious steroids.
Mm-hmm.
Get real predictive value out of it in a way that has in some cases been an order of magnitude better than what you would get from traditional marketing approaches that are based on just asking people, how much do you like this? How much do you remember? What would you pay for it?
You're going right to the source.
Yeah, you're going exactly. So if you want to know the truth, ask the brain directly. Don't ask the person.
That's a great point. I love that. You're working at one of the most elite institutions in the world. And, the term high performance comes up in business all the time. High performance teams, high performance leaders. And this podcast is all about high performance. What does high performance mean to you?
It's a great question. I was just on our kind of bi-weekly call this morning. We're trying to build a high performance institute for sports and medicine. And
that's what I did for 15 years. Yeah, I understand that challenge. Go ahead.
So it's really fascinating because you have people from the athletic department, people from school of medicine, engineering, and also from outside groups that are trying to do exactly that. So it's super exciting. But it's maximizing your potential, right? So it's understanding what that potential is and closing the gap between where you are and where you can be. And I think one thing that we are particularly cognizant of right now is the fact that there's sort of individual peak performance and then there's collective peak performance. So team performance is perhaps more critical now than ever before in many endeavors, whether it's in the office or in the military or in sports.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes what's peak performance for an individual is consistent with what it is for the team, but often it's the team. The team dynamics matter more than the collection of the individual peak performance. You know what I mean? So team chemistry is critical. And we've seen that in time and time again. Going back to my favorite example is the 1980 U.S. men's Olympic hockey team, which were a bunch of college guys, who beat the Soviet Union, who were professional, hockey players, the best in the world, and these college guys had great team chemistry. And that's why they won. And so that's kind of a lot of what our efforts are here is trying to figure out what is team chemistry, right? What is the real chemistry behind or the biology behind team chemistry?
Mm.
And that's really exciting because if we can figure that out, I think that will help us on the pitch. That'll help us on the field. But it'll help us in the office too.
That's very interesting. I love that. So we talked a little bit about exercise, but what are things that you are doing personally to make sure that you are staying at your best and that you're, closing that gap between what your potential is and then maintaining a high level of output? Well,
I think, there's several things. I think I am exercising my brain every day. I have a job that requires me to do that. So I'm pretty engaged in that. For knowing myself, I have a lot of variety in my days as well. And also social connection is critical for health and vitality and I think for performance. But if there's one thing that neuroscience has really taught us is critical, probably goes beyond everything else we talked about. It's nutrition. It's nutrition and exercise. So physical exercise is not only critical for maintaining the health of your body, but also the health of your brain. And whether that's, aerobic exercise or high intensity interval training or even endurance, but it seems very clear that all of those have a positive impact on the brain. And in the case of, for example, neuropsychiatric disorders, that's as good as or better than the best pharmaceutical treatment. Wouldn't you just rather, exercise, feel good about yourself, and your mental health is going to improve? So I do that every day. I mean, I'm a CrossFit junkie for 14 years. So I've been doing that for a long time. And that totally transformed my life because I was always a gym rat, but discovering CrossFit was like just that the intensity and the variety. So it really makes your brain work.
Talk about a group dynamic too. It's the box.
The box, exactly.
Yep, so I can see why you like it.
I love it. And the other is what I eat. And so, our brains are very hungry. They demand about 20% of the calories that we eat every day, but it's not just calories that our brains need. They need specific nutrients. And, the thing that the nutrients they really need are amino acids to make, which are, you can only get from protein, because those amino acids are the precursors from which your brain makes chemicals that are very important for decision making and learning and social interactions, so dopamine and norepinephrine, serotonin. If you don't get those amino acids, especially in the morning, like after you fasted, you slept all night, you didn't eat anything, what you put in your body first will have a big impact on your brain function for some time thereafter. And, there's really compelling evidence that if you eat a really carb-heavy breakfast, you're not getting those amino acids and you're going to have depletion of some of those chemicals. So it makes me, first of all, I start every day with a protein shake, whey protein, so that's how I get going. But it also makes me think hard about and I'm always on my kids because it's of course they just want to eat bagels and cereal or whatever. And, I'm like, you're going to be a wreck at school. You've got to get some protein.
Exactly. I feel really good about what we're doing with our kids now. My wife, every morning, it's like either it's protein and fruit pretty much every morning.
Yeah, that's what
she's feeding them. Yeah. This is great. I think I'm very pleased. I'm pleasantly surprised that you brought those two things up because it kind of comes back to in sports, we call them rudiments. Or the simplistic things that you can do, and those are the two. Like if you don't exercise and you don't provide the right nutrients for your body, I don't really care what field you're in. There's going to be a cost, and sometimes the cost is really, really high, and we don't want to pay that price. Somebody that's curious, and I've come to see this a little bit more through our interactions. You're very curious, and I just love your brain, honestly, just how you think through things. What are you doing right now to help you grow or expand your mind? Are there books you're reading, podcasts, or certain things that you dive into to help expand your mind?
Yeah, I read. Mm-hmm. That's where I go. So, and I read a lot of different kinds of things.
What are you reading right now?
I'm reading a book called The Overstory, which is a Pulitzer Prize winning book about trees, basically. So it's and people who it's like a bunch of different vignettes that then converge on a single kind of attempt to save large, these sort of giant redwood trees that are thousands of years old. Anyway, it's a really fascinating revolution in the way we think about, and there's lots of nonfiction books on this, or at least a couple I know of, that revolution in the way we think about trees and plants, but trees especially, which is that they are connected to each other in very similar ways to how we are connected to each other. They send communication messages to each other through the roots. They actually give and receive kind of gifts of carbon, depending on who needs it. There's like charity. I mean, it's really kind of fascinating. And, I know it sounds all like Avatar, but it's like,
it doesn't. The more you understand about the world, it's like so much interconnectedness. And then even from a biochemical standpoint, I remember when I took one of my graduate school classes in biochemistry, I just walked away like just mind blown. I just was like, the organization of all of this stuff and the intercommunication, it doesn't surprise me. And now I want to go read this book on trees. What's it called?
The Overstory.
The Overstory, okay.
That's a fictional account, but it grows out of, there's actually a couple of nonfiction books. I think there's one that was just written up in the New York Times this morning called The Mother Tree, I think, or something like that.
Interesting.
Yeah. I've always had an interest in botany, and I'm a gardener myself. So, I've maintained that passion. That's something I'd like to do a lot. It's a creative, it's a really interesting, fun thing because you're nurturing something, but it's also like you're painting with plants, and it's a lot of fun.
That is awesome. That is so cool. You're probably the first gardener I've met in a while. That's really cool. How can people find you, support you? Like, where can they get your book?
You can get the book on Amazon, or Wharton Press, on Amazon. And they can follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Those are pretty easy. Or even just Google me. There's a bunch of there's tons of videos and whatnot out there. So I'm a prolific tweeter.
Well, I'll be following. And Michael, I have really enjoyed spending time with you. It was serendipitous. I was following another neuroscientist. He tweeted about you. And I was like, okay, interesting. So I went over, I saw the book. I was like, I got to buy this. I purchased the book. And I was like, now I got to get this guy on my podcast because we're going to have some great conversations. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us. And I know that you really enriched the lives of those that listen today.
It's been a real pleasure. I've enjoyed talking with you too. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. If today's podcast enriched your life in any way, please support the BluePrint by doing one of the following. If you're listening on an audio platform like Apple or Spotify, please subscribe. If you're listening on Apple, would you please leave us a 5-star review and give us some feedback? Your feedback is tremendously valuable. Finally, if you watch us on YouTube, subscribe and leave us some feedback. We'd love to know how to improve the show and which topics you're loving. But until next time, this is Erik Horm. Thank you for tuning in.
Thanks for listening. You can find more episodes and all other Hot Pie Media originals baked fresh daily at our home on the web at hotpiemedia.com, the Hot Pie Media YouTube channel, or wherever you listen to podcasts.